Hello and welcome to the English Like a Native podcast, the listening resource for intermediate to advanced level English learners. My name is Anna and today we have a very special guest. Let me introduce Stephen from Simple English News Daily, or rather SEND7. Hi Stephen, how are you?
I am very well. Thank you, Anna. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Stephen, I did listen to the news this morning, but maybe I should be listening to your podcast. How up to date is your podcast? How quickly do you get the news out onto your podcast?
Well, it is a daily podcast. So yeah, Monday to Friday. Yeah, every day it's there. So yeah, it's not on Saturdays and Sundays, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it's there.
Fantastic. And so your podcast is all about teaching English through news. So let's go back to the very beginning. How did you get into teaching English? I always like the origin stories.
Okay, I was always a language learner myself. I speak Spanish and French. I studied them in secondary school, and after I finished school, I went to France for a while, 6 months or something. And then after university, I lived in Spain for a year and traveled the world in a few different places, lived in Argentina for a couple of years as well. And yeah, during that time, as well as learning languages, I was teaching English. I wasn't always, 100% sure that that's what I wanted to do, but I just enjoyed it, so carried on doing that. And I was also a primary school teacher in England for the last 3 or 4 years as well.
So you're back in the UK now?
I am.
You miss the sunny shores of the UK?
Yeah, wow. It's looking incredibly grey and rainy and windy at the moment. The stereotypical English day. I do miss the sunshine sometimes. Yeah, when I was in Spain, I was living in Granada, which is in the south. It's really, really hot during the summer. Although it actually gets quite cold in the winter as well. And in Argentina, I was living in the north in a place called Resistencia, which is really, really hot. Like 40 degrees during the summer. It's crazy. So yeah, it's quite a difference being back in England again.
And when you were teaching, you've recently finished teaching in primary school, but what were you teaching in primary school? Were you teaching English there as well, or just generic kind of all-round education?
Yeah, I was an all-round primary teacher. I don't know what it's like exactly in most other countries, but yeah, generally in England, primary school teachers just teach everything. So English, maths, science. Maybe you have a different teacher for PE or music or something, but...
Or drama.
Did you do drama in primary school?
I taught drama, yeah.
Oh, great.
So I was the head of drama. I was the drama department at a private primary school for a while, not far from where I live now, actually. Yeah, I enjoyed primary school for the children are fun. It's a great age, the primary age. They're uninhibited and, full of energy. But it was the paperwork and the politics that I wasn't a fan of, I have to say.
Yeah, nobody likes the paperwork and the politics. But yeah, no, I got to teach a lot of Spanish as well because I was the only person in the school who could speak Spanish. So I was used in a lot of different classes and I pretty much wrote my own curriculum for what the other year groups could be learning and that.
Fantastic.
But yeah, I really enjoyed it.
So what took you from being in a classroom full of kids and teaching all-round education to, I'm guessing, sitting alone in a room, speaking to a microphone, teaching English through news? How did you make that transition?
You make podcasting sound so lonely, but sometimes it is, isn't it? Yeah, it was actually really... I was actually doing them both at the same time for quite a long time, which was really difficult, really, really a lot of work. But it was mostly because I thought that this idea for a podcast, Simple English News Daily, SEND7, was just a really good idea. And I thought that people would be really interested in it because I was already listening to, not exactly the same thing, but I was already listening to news podcasts and listening to the radio in French and Spanish myself every day, and this was kind of especially since being back in England and also being in other places where I wasn't speaking Spanish and French, I wanted to have this kind of connection every day to the languages that I knew. So I was often listening to the radio and podcasts, and particularly the news. And this made me think, I wonder if there is some kind of daily news podcast which is spoken in a little bit more of an easy way for people with English as a second language to understand. And there wasn't one. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make it myself.
So you saw a gap in the market, we'd say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a total gap in the market. Yeah. And of course, it's a pretty crazy thing to do because it's so much work to do every single day. But once I started it, it became reasonably popular quite quickly. Like, it was always growing, and I got some really nice feedback. Lots of people saying that they started listening to it every day when they were drinking their coffee, or on the train or something. And it was just great. So I thought, yeah, I'm going to keep going. And yeah, only last July, I left the school life just to concentrate on the podcast. So
you took the plunge. Into full-time YouTubing, not YouTubing, full-time podcasting.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Definitely not YouTubing, actually, because the podcast is not on YouTube at the moment. So
it could be. Yeah. It could be. We'll talk about that afterwards.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah.
So I think it is a really great idea using news as a teaching point, because news is so relevant to so many people. It's part of my daily routine. I come down in the morning and I ask my, device that sits on the side that you talk to with a name beginning with A that I can't say because she starts talking back to me. I ask her what's the news, and she'll play it to me. And sometimes after lunch, I'll ask her again, what's the news? And I just listen while I'm cooking or cleaning up, and just trying to keep up to date with what's going on in the world and in this country. It's always such a roller coaster. I've certainly been much more into the news since COVID, or actually since Brexit. I think once we had the Brexit vote, from that point on, I think I was just so flabbergasted with what was going on, and so much more involved and interested in like politics and what's actually happening at a national and international level, that maybe it's an age thing, I don't know. Maybe you just get to a point in life where you feel like you're actually impacted by things in the world, and you need to know what's going on.
I actually think, and I think the same thing happened for a lot of people in Britain from Brexit, just because there was such a dramatic effect on people's actual lives coming from a political decision. So I think there was something, it was quite a moment for people to go, oh, wow, this stuff that happens on the news, it actually has a big effect on me. Wow, okay.
And Brexit is still such a big talking point, isn't it? I mean, I know that within families, within my family, within my partner's family, there's disagreements. Like, we sit on opposite sides of the fence. And, this rift that's been created from the Brexit vote has continued to be a debate up until this day. Things like, if anything is difficult now because of Brexit, or if it comes out that it hasn't been as successful, it's always like, see, this is what you did. It's a continuous kind of battle to convince the others that maybe it wasn't such a good idea, but everyone's got their own opinion.
It's been 8 years, so I wonder whether in another 8 years it will be exactly the same. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I've started seeing in people's windows as I drive around, like, reunite posters. That'll be the next big thing, probably. I don't know. Anyway, coming back to the idea of using news to teach. Now, I think it's a great idea, but I think you have to be a little bit brave, almost bold, to go out publicly and discuss news in a global kind of way on a global platform, because some news, well, all news is divisive in some way. It kind of triggers people, especially with what's going on with the conflicts and all the political change, and there's just so much emotion attached to the news. And
100%.
I know if I ever even hint at not taking a side, but supporting something on social media, I will get, lots of applause, but I'll also get lots of hate and attack and how dare you and what about this and don't you care about this? And I'm like, whoa. So I just shy away from it generally. So what's your experience been with handling the news?
Yeah, great question. And so true. Yeah, for reasons like what you've just said, the default position can be, okay, I'm just not going to talk about anything. I'm not going to go anywhere near any of those controversial subjects. And I don't blame you or anybody for not wanting to. Although actually, even then, you can still have people sending you messages going, why aren't you talking about blah, 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 blah? No? So yeah, it can be impossible. But from the perspective of Simple English News Daily, our aim is to be as neutral as possible. So just no opinion, just trying to make it as statement of fact as possible. And I think we generally do pretty well on that. Yeah, we get a lot of compliments, actually, emails and things saying, oh, it's so unbiased, which I absolutely love. And I hope for it to always stay like that. But the truth is, there's always going to be somebody who thinks that you're not unbiased. It's just impossible.
You can't please everyone.
You can't. It's actually impossible. And there's no point in trying because you can't do it. There's always going to be somebody who doesn't believe the things that you say, even if you try and make it as unbiased and factual as possible. So yeah, so you have to accept that.
What's your source then? Because, even I always believed, the BBC is an unbiased news source, but many people would argue that that's not true. It depends where the funding comes from. Everyone's got an agenda these days. So where do you go and how do you kind of ensure that you are remaining unbiased and reporting just the facts as you find them?
Yeah, I mean, again, no source is perfect, and there's always going to be people who disagree with your sources anyway. But the places that I generally go to are the more commonly well-known sources that just have thousands of journalists working for them. So Reuters news agency is one of the big ones. Associated Press is another one of the big ones. They have journalists just working all over the world who are really hands-on with their stories. But then also, I would definitely go to the BBC for a lot of things. I mean, really, the truth is, for a lot of the things that we're saying, there's not going to be much controversy in the reporting of most stories. Like, for example, if there has been an earthquake in Ecuador, the difference between the reporting of the BBC or CNN or Reuters or Al Jazeera is going to be minimal. For most stories, the sources agree with each other. It's only from slightly more controversial topics that you get differences in the way that they report on things. And in those cases, I try to read a lot of them, which is why I spend so much time reading and watching and listening to the news, particularly of the more controversial things. But also to avoid bias in the podcast, we just use terms like according to da-da-da, blah, 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 blah. So according to Al Jazeera, this happened, blah, blah, blah. According to the BBC, they said this person said this person said this. So you can kind of...
Just reporting on what's being said without committing to knowing it or suggesting that it's fact.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So is there anything that you actually avoid? Because obviously with things like conflict and death, murder, things like that, is there anything when you go, maybe that's just a bit too gruesome or a bit too negative, I might not cover that one?
No, actually there isn't. No, we would
cover no holds
everything.
Barred.
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think that there's anything which we've ever just not reported on because it's too gruesome. There have been a few episodes where I've actually said the next 90 seconds of audio are reporting on something really violent or something. If you want to, you can skip ahead to minute 2:30 or something like that.
That's helpful,
I've said
I guess,
that a few
if there's
times.
Kids in the room. And
Exactly, yeah. I've had a bit of uncertainty about how I feel about children listening to Simple English News Daily because of that. Because the truth is, death makes the news. It's one of those things which happens, almost every day. When quite a lot of people die, it's generally going to be in the news. Even whether that's an earthquake or an attack or something, it just is. And yeah, I've heard quite a few people say that they listen to SEND7 with their children, and I've often thought I'm not sure how I feel about that. But I suppose the truth is, when I was a kid, I was listening to stuff on the news as well. So I guess it's the same. Yeah.
They've got to grow up sometime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And realise this world that we live in. But it's not all bad. In every episode of SEND7, there's always good news as well, or some funny news or something random that happens as well. We cover stories from every continent. So there's something from Europe every day, something from Asia and Oceania every day, something from Africa every day, and something from the Americas every day. And yeah, so there's always going to be a mix. There's going to be something bad, but there's always going to be something light-hearted as well.
So touching on that, I had a look to see if I could find any kind of good fun stories knocking around the news recently. And I found one. I don't know if you came across this story about the thong-wearing protesters in Australia.
I haven't heard that, no.
Okay, let me read this to you.
Hang on a minute though. Thongs in Australia means...
No, but I'm talking about swimwear, bare bottoms.
Okay, because I think thongs in Australia mean sandals, right?
Yeah, it does. I think it's more slang though, so I think that it depends where in Australia. I'm not 100% sure on that, but
yeah.
But yeah, the story I saw says throngs of thong-wearing protesters. I love that. Throngs of thong-wearing protesters bared their bums on Australia's Gold Coast as they showed their opposition to calls for a ban on G-string bikini bottoms. The demonstration was called Free the Peach. And it's fantastic. Because some people are saying the skimpiest swimwear is just demeaning to women, that it's objectifying them and it's unpleasant and it should be banned. And other people are like, we should have the freedom to bare our bums if that's what we want to do. I thought that was quite an interesting story.
Yeah, but then, I mean, if you really want to get into the politics of just how big some underwear, some beachwear has to be. I mean, are you going to have police going up and down the beach checking the size of everybody's
at what point do you stop? Can you show a little bit of your butt? Or does it have to be fully covered? I mean,
yeah. You're going to get the ruler out and start measuring people on the beach. Doesn't sound great. I think I'm going to be with the bare bummers on that story.
Yeah. I can understand wanting to bare your bum if you've got lots of sunshine. There's nothing worse than having that, what we call the bikini line, the tan line, cutting your bum in half. Did you see the one about the Guinness World Records oldest dog?
Yes. Do you know what? I've even followed that story quite a bit, actually, because SEND7 reported on that. It must have been maybe 6 months ago or something, when Bobby, the Portuguese dog, actually won the award for the oldest dog. And then we reported when he died a few months later in October. There you go. I know this story quite a bit.
Oh, good memory.
I think he was supposed to be 31. And then
31 and 165 days old.
There you go. But it was only recently that the Guinness World Records have taken it away.
They've stripped him of his title.
They've stripped him of his title, exactly right, saying that there wasn't enough evidence. And I think it was because the owners in these old registries from the 90s, they were allowed to write in their own date of birth of the dog. And because they were allowed to write it in themselves, the Guinness World Record says, actually, we don't have enough proof that that's actually true. You could have just made that up. So they've taken it away.
They've got to maintain their high standards, right? So they can't just say, we'll take your word for it.
What they've now gone back to saying was the oldest dog was this dog called Bluey from Australia, who was around in 1935 or something like that, which was 29. And I think really that those records can't be that good either, right? From the 1930s of a dog
how
who
can you
made
prove
it to 29.
that? But these dogs have got a life expectancy of 12 to 14 years. And so to live nearly 30 or over 30 years it's like a person getting to, 180 or 190. It seems a little bit far-fetched to me.
It does. Yeah.
The other things that popped up in the news for me that I thought were interesting, both are around dental news, gnashers. The first is that some children, I think this is specifically in America, are being gifted like $100 bills and designer jewelry by the tooth fairy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those are some spoiled children.
Yeah. Did you ever have a visit from the tooth fairy when you were growing up?
Do you know what? We didn't do that in my family, actually.
No.
But I know...
What did you do with your teeth when they fell out? Just
I can't remember.
stuck them in the bin?
Yeah, no. I think I kept them somewhere lying around. No, I didn't do the tooth fairy.
We
Did
had
you?
the tooth fairy. I think it was like we got 20 pence or 50 pence if we were a little older, perhaps.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah. So for those listening who aren't familiar with the tooth fairy visits when you lose a tooth, one of your milk teeth or your baby teeth, you put it under your pillow, and then as you sleep, the tooth fairy will come and replace your tooth with a gift, a coin, usually. If you've got good teeth, if you've got rotten teeth and you haven't been brushing your teeth and looking after them, then she doesn't want your teeth. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. If these kids are getting like designer jewelry and $100 bills, that is definitely a spoiled child. I would.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, no.
The other tooth story is about Winston Churchill's false teeth.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard about that one. Yeah.
They were snapped up. I love that. They were snapped up at auction for £18,000.
Yeah.
Can
Amazing.
you imagine?
Yeah, I wonder what people are going to do with those. I suppose they're not going to be using them and going, I've got Winston Churchill's false teeth in my mouth. No.
Yeah. Oh, can you? Oh, yeah.
Gross.
Yuck.
Yeah, but apparently he was wearing them in some particular speeches. And
we'll fight them on the beaches.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
go.
there's many famous speeches, but apparently he had like 4 sets of false teeth. So I don't think you can definitely say that the ones that you just spent £18,000 on are the ones that he wore specifically during those big speeches. They might have just been his spare pair that sat in the back of a dusty drawer.
Yeah. I do know of another auction story recently, actually, which was from a few weeks ago. That was somebody wanted to sell this big cabinet, like a wardrobe, at auction that they thought was from like the 1830s or something like that. So like almost 200 years old. And when they were going to be taking it to the auction house, they found a lemon inside it. And the lemon had an inscription. So like somebody had written on this lemon and it said, from somebody to somebody, I think it was 1780 something. So like the lemon was 250 or 270 years old or something like that. Sorry if I'm getting this story wrong. And so they found this lemon in the wardrobe and then they put that on auction instead. And it was shown to be, that old, 270 years old or something. And that sold for a few £1,000s, and the wardrobe only got like £40.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
Things people want.
It's crazy what people spend their money on.
It is. Yeah, totally. I don't know whether I would prefer to have a really old lemon or Winston Churchill's false teeth, but yeah.
So coming back to our lovely learners, how would you suggest that an English learner can make the most of learning English through news?
Yeah. I suppose from my perspective of how I've used the news as a learner, it's primarily been from having this contact with it every day. So just it's such an easy thing to slip into your routine to listen to the news. Like when I go down and make myself breakfast, I put on French radio for 10 minutes or something. And it's just like a routine that I have every day. And it's easy to do that with the news. So it's good for people who, even if they're not like actively learning English, it's a good way to kind of keep up with it. But then for people who want to do it more actively and actually engage more with their contents, then they can, if they're following a story every day, then it can be easier to pick up more and more words from the same story. If they know about a story in their own language, then they're more likely to understand it in English.
Because of the context.
Exactly, yeah, the context. And then, of course, if they really want to, Well, with something like SEND7, they could print out the transcripts or be following it by reading it at the same time. There's some activities they can do.
Yeah, and then you can go ahead and report to other people what you've heard. You can discuss, my partner and I, we often, if I go out in the car and I've listened to a radio, like you listen to LBC, just because occasionally I find it interesting. They discuss things a little bit more in depth, and I will often come back after listening to that and say, oh, did you hear about this? And so then we discuss it and I say, oh, well, apparently, and I'd give him more details about the story, and then he'll take it or leave it, completely ignore me perhaps. But your listeners or anyone who's learning English through news can use that as an activity to then take what they're hearing, make some notes of the interesting vocabulary that's specifically attached to that story, and then replay it, go and retell it to someone using that vocabulary so that you're actually kind of making it more active.
Yeah.
For yourself.
Well, let's think about the 4 things now. So listening, well, you're listening to it anyway, so that's the idea. Reading, you can obviously read the news. If you're listening to SEND7, you can read the transcripts, or reading any other part of the news that you can find. Writing, you can challenge yourself. So you can make yourself try to write in your own words something that you've just been hearing about in India.
Or write it in a text
blah, blah, blah,
to a friend.
Happened.
Did you hear about the bare bottom protest in Australia?
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Start a conversation with a friend like that. And of course, speaking, you can do the same thing. Talk to your friend about it. If you don't have somebody to talk to yourself. Like, I used to do that when I was in Argentina, when I was just by myself.
Walk around talking to yourself.
Yeah, talk to myself in Spanish. Yeah, maybe if I was in public, then maybe just in my head. But yeah, just try and think, how do I say that? If I wanted to say this, how would I say this? Yeah,
fantastic.
There you go.
I've got one last question for you. So one thing I struggle with when I'm including factual or historical pieces within my content is pronunciation of names and places. How do you make sure that you're pronouncing things correctly? I recently did an episode which hasn't been released yet that includes talking about chess grandmasters. And there's a Russian chap who was a chess grandmaster. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Garry
Kasparov.
Yeah. And I think I was calling Garry Kasparov or something. I was completely messing it up, and then one of my team who's Ukrainian was like, "You've mispronounced this quite a few times."
I probably have as well. I've said Kasparov because I've read that myself.
I think in Russian it's Kasparov.
Yeah, it could be.
I'd really, really made mincemeat of the name, and it happens a lot. I completely mispronounce names and places. And how do you make sure that you're not doing that?
Wow, I'm going to sound like an advert right now. So disclaimer, this is not an advert, right? But honestly, there's this website called Forvo, which I use all the time. I've never been asked this question before, by the way, Anna. This is the first time I've ever been asked this, but I use it all the time. If I'm ever not sure how to pronounce a name, there's this website called Forvo, and it's just a website of people pronouncing words, but mostly names.
Yeah. Can you spell that out for me?
Forvo.
Okay.
Forvo. I guess it's .com, I think. I can't remember. Yeah, I use it all the time. So
fantastic. I will almost every day. That to my list of resources. That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's really, really useful. And they generally have a few different people saying it as well. So it's just people recording themselves saying that name, and it shows the country that the person who is speaking comes from as well. So you might have a Ukrainian saying Garry Kasparov, and you might have a Russian saying Garry Kasparov. I don't know, and you can hear it and choose your favorite one. But yeah, fantastic. Really useful.
Yeah, that's a really, really useful little resource you've shared with me. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And if my listeners would like to come over and start adding news to their daily routine, where can they find you?
Well, if they're listening in a podcast app, then they can search Simple English News Daily. Or if they don't have a podcast app, well, you should go and get one because podcast apps are the best.
Yeah.
I can recommend Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Castbox, whatever. But it's also on send7.org. So SEND7.org. And just in case you didn't pick up on it before, SEND7 stands for Simple English News Daily. And the 7 is 7 minutes because it's a 7-minute podcast every day. So there you go.
Fantastic. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you for joining. I will put your links in the description and in the show notes so that it can be easily found as well. Take very good care. And until next time, goodbye.
Bye. Thanks for having me, Anna.